right, welcome to this special episode on my YouTube channel. And it's special in that sense because I'm going to recreate an application that two fellow course creators and YouTubers already created. I think it is awesome because I'm very much into space stuff and tech and sci-fi. So I really love this one because they created this application where you can see the weather on Mars with an API that NASA provides for us. And the people that built this one are really great. And their name is, first we have WebDevSimplified, and he has a really great YouTube channel where he shows a lot of great stuff, and he created the vanilla JavaScript for this application. So it was a collab between him and also Kevin Powell, the CSS king of the world. He's really great and he's awesome at CSS, and he has this channel also where he creates a lot of great stuff. So both these channels, they have really great stuff, and I suggest that you give them a visit and subscribe to their channels. So they created this application, the weather app here. This is my version. I've tweaked the CSS a little bit just to fit the style components that I'm going to use for this tutorial, because my take on this is that I'm going to recreate it with React. And I also tweaked some other small stuff. For example, I have some border radius here, because I like that. And I also started to make it a little bit responsive like this. So I thought that could be a good challenge for you to try it yourself when you build this application. You can try to tweak the CSS and make a little bit better responsive styling for it. So you can see here I have this scroll here. Maybe that's not optimal. I don't know. I haven't given it that much thought. Think about it. It can be a great challenge for you if you want to practice CSS. And you can change days here. We have 7 days here to see the weather on Mars. And no, unfortunately, this is the same wind direction here on all of the days. Otherwise, this needle will spin to change the direction. And we're going to create that one also. Yeah, you can see it there because this one has no data. And that was also a use case I found out just before I started recording this one. So we have to take that one into consideration because the API didn't return data for the wind speed on this day. So we have to figure that one out. And I have, I think, a great solution for that one, because we are going to use the ES 2020 syntax for optional chaining for this one. So it's a great practice there. All right, so this is the application that we're going to build, and I have provided you with some starter files for this one, because I'm not going to recreate the styles. Kevin Powell has already done that. And I'm also going to use some stuff from the original vanilla.js code that WebDevSimplified created. To be honest, I don't really know his name because I'm on this Discord where I chat with him, but his name is WebDevSimplified and he has his channel. That's also that name, so I don't really know his name. But he's awesome, and Kevin Powell is also awesome. So I won't be recreating these ones, so I've provided you with these starter files that you can download in the link below the video, and you can start from there. And I'm going to talk you through the files now. But first, if you like this channel, don't forget to subscribe. I will put up videos like this, a lot of React stuff on a regular basis. All right, so let's check out the code. If you download the starter files, you will have an application that is bootstrapped with Create React App. And what I've done is that I've installed style components also, because I'm using that for styling. And if we check out the files, you have the regular index file, and then you have the app. For now, this one is just empty. You can see here that I'm going to use useState and useEffect. The app component is going to be the heart of this application. I also have a file that's called helpers.js, and this one I took them straight off from the vanilla.js script in their application. So you have this function here that formats the date and also formats the temperature. So I export them here because I'm going to import them in my component later. And then I, of course, have the styling. There's some global styling here that I create. You can do that with style components by importing this function that's called create global style. And then you can create your global styling inside of it. So we're going to import this one and use it in our app component later. And also I have the wrapper for the app, and the Mars weather is also a wrapper. So you have to check this stuff out yourself, because I'm not going to talk about the CSS that much in this tutorial. And I highly suggest to look at Kevin's tutorial first to create the CSS, and then maybe also look at the vanilla JS version that WebDevSimplified creates, so you have the basic knowledge and discussion about the app. All right. Then I have a file that I call api.js, and this one is the URL to the NASA API, and the API key for now is a demo key. Please note that this one will only allow you to make, I think it is 30 hits an hour or something to the API, then it won't work. You have to wait to the next hour. And I think also it's restricted to 50 hits a day. So if you run into some trouble where you can't get the data, it's probably because you have to register to get a valid key and not use this demo key instead. But I'm using it for this tutorial, so I haven't created my own, but it's easy. You can visit NASA and get your free API key there. At least I think it's free. Yeah, it has to be free. I haven't registered any there at all. Okay, then I provided you with 4 components and styling. So we have the info component and the info styles. We have the previous component and the previous styles. We have the unit and the unit styles, and the weather data and the weather data styles. And if we look at the app here, so this is the weather data. It has, you could split it up in 3 components itself, but I didn't do that because I'm not going to reuse them. It's just for this tutorial. Then you have the unit changer, that's the component. And you have the info component here with just regular text. And then you have the previous component here where you can get the previous weather. All right. So let's start this off in the app component, and that's the component we're going to be the most in. So in the app.js file, I'm going to bump up the text here for us, and I'm going to remove the sidebar, and we can start this off. We're already importing React and useState and useEffect, so we don't have to do anything there. But we are going to need a helpers. So I create a comment, import format date. That's the only one that we're going to use in the app component. From /help us, like so. Then we can grab the API URL. So import API underscore URL from /API. Be very careful with the spelling. And then we have our 4 components. So I marked them with components just to give it a little bit of nice structure here. Import weather data from /components and weather data. All right. We import info from /components /info capital I. Import unit from /components unit. And the last one, import previous from /components previous. Do some auto formatting. All right, there you have it. Then we need a background image, and I put that in a folder that I call img. So import, I call it bg image from ./img mars.jpg. All right. And the last thing we have to import is the styling for the app component. So styles, import app wrapper global style Mars weather info wrapper. And these are, of course, the ones I talked about before that I have already created for you, the style components. All right, we import them from ./app.styles. All right, I like to structure my styles like this. Some people like to have them in this file, but I think that will mess up my code a little bit. So I like to have them in my own file and import them like this instead. For me, at least, it makes sense. It makes it a little bit cleaner. Okay, then we're going to build this app. So how is this going to work? We're going to need 5 different states: the loading, the weather. The weather is going to keep all the weather data in an array. And then the selected sol. The selected sol is the active day that we're on. And we have the metric. Are we using Fahrenheit or Celsius? So we're going to have a boolean for that. And previous and set previous. Previous is going to be used to show the previous menu. If we check it out here. So this is a boolean that controls this one if it's open or closed. All right. So we can create these states, const. We are, of course, using hooks. So we're creating states by using the useState hook. So loading and set loading, we have the state and then the setter, useState. I'm going to set this to true to begin with because we are going to fetch the data instantly when we mount this component. Const, we have the weather and set weather. And this is the array that I talked about that is going to keep all the data. useState, we can initiate it with an empty array. Then we have the selected sol and set selected sol, useState, and it can be empty for now. We have the metric and set metric, useState, and we set it to true as a default value. And the last state that we're going to need is the previous and set previous, like that, useState. And we're going to keep it closed initially, so we set that one to false. All right, so that's the states that we're going to need. And for this one, we need a use effect also. We want to fetch the data when we mount this component, and you do that in a use effect. Use effect, we have an inline arrow function, and inside of here, we can create our code. And in this case, we are going to grab the data on mount. So we have an empty array here. We're not going to have any dependencies here because there's no need for that in this one. It will warn us if we don't specify a dependency here. You should always specify the dependencies that it warns you that you need to have. You shouldn't cheat here and don't provide the dependencies. But in our case, we won't have any external dependencies outside of this use effect, so we won't need it. So this one will trigger once on mount, and that's exactly what we need. So inside the use effect, we are going to create this code, but first we can actually create our JSX in our return statement down below here. So remove this one, create parentheses, and we return something inside of these parentheses. So we're going to structure our JSX for the app here. So first we have a fragment. You have to return one element in your return statement. So you use a fragment like this if you don't want to create an actual div or something in your DOM. So that's why we use the fragment here. I don't want to create a div. Then we have our global styles that I created with style components, as I talked about before. And you create the global styles, and then you use the component like this, and that will apply the global styles to your application. And I want to set the BG image for this one. BG image, so I send that one in. We imported this one up here, img BG image, and I have a typo. It should be a small m, BG image, like that. And I also have another typo here. It should say mars.jpg. All right, so that's the BG image, and I send that one in so it can apply it to as a background image. We can actually look at the global styling here. So I invoke this create global style with my CSS, and if we scroll down here, you can see on the body, I'm setting the background image from props. So this is how you grab props in your style components, and this is the BG image prop that I send in for this one. So let's go back to the app.js file. We're going to have our app wrapper like that. And inside we have the Mars weather. Right? And as we have this state here that says loading, we can check if we're loading something. So we have curly braces. So we check if we're loading. We have a turner operator. If we're loading something, we return a div that says loading. You could, of course, have a loading spinner also if you want to have that. Then we have colon, And if we're not loading, we're going to return our JSX inside of this parenthesis. And we need to have another fragment here because we want to return one element, otherwise it will complain at us. And first we have the h1 tag. I'm going to use the class names as they did in the original tutorial. So we set a class name to main-title. And these styles are, of course, predefined. And latest weather at Elysium Plantitia. I don't know really how you pronounce that. Do some auto formatting maybe to get a little bit more structure. That's the h1 tag. So that's the header that we have up here. And then we are going to show our weather data. For now, we're just closing it like this. We are going to send in some props to it later. Then we have the info wrapper. And inside the info wrapper, we have the info. Self-close it. Then we have the unit. And this one is also going to get some props later. We're doing some serious prop drilling here. No, not that serious. We're just sending them down one level, so not that serious. That's why I also didn't create a global state for this one. And I wanted to keep it simple, so it could be kind of a beginner's tutorial in React or something. All right. So then below, just below the Mars weather here, we can display the previous component, and this one is also going to have some props later. So we save it, just make sure that everything looks right. I think it is. Go back to the browser, see what we've got. So we have this nice little image here of Mars, and it only says loading, and that's of course sad, but we are going to fix that. At least it seems like our components are working, so that's great. And now we're going to apply the actual logic to this one to make it work. So back inside of the code editor, and we are going to create our use effect. So inside the curly braces here in the use effect, we are going to fetch our data. And fetching of the data is async. So we can't really mark this one as async here. That won't work. You can't mark the use effect function with async. But what we can do is to create an inline function here that we call maybe fetch from API. And we can mark that one async. And that will work. All right. And below, we are going to invoke this one. So fetch from API. Like so. And that's a complete legit way to do it in your use effect. In a bigger app, you probably would create a custom hook for your fetching, so you won't do it inline in your component like this. But for this use case, it will work just fine. We don't have that much code. We are going to have this one use effect. That's the only one that we're going to have. Okay. So inside our fetch from API inline function, we create a const that we call weather, and we await again. And this, I have explained this one in some other tutorials. That's because first we await the data that we're going to grab from the API. Then we await when we convert it to JSON, because converting to JSON is also async. So that's why we have double await here. And you could make it a little bit cleaner maybe and have it on 2 rows. And then you first grab the data, and then you have another const where you convert it with JSON. So yeah, it depends on what you like. I like this to actually have it just on 1 row. All right, so we await the fetch, and we have our API underscore URL that we imported up here. So that is going to hit the API and grab the data for us. And then we are going to convert it with JSON like this. So this is the second await. We first await the data, and then we await what's inside of the red parenthesis here. And that's when we convert it to JSON. So that's why we have 2 await. And for now, we can console log out the weather just to see that we get some data. And let's hope that I haven't used up all my limited hits that I can do in an hour or a day. So let's see what happens. I open up the console. Of course, I save the file first. console and see what we got. We got an object and we have all the data here, and that's great. So we have a lot of stuff here. Yeah, this is the temperature here, AT, and this is the wind speed that we got here. And I don't really know. And we have the compass here. So we are going to grab these values inside of this use effect hook now. So it's working. That's great. We know that we have some data. So get back to the code. We can remove the console log if you want to do that. And then we create another const that I'm going to call mass weather equals. We are going to map through a property on this weather. And we have something that's called sol_keys. So go back. I can show you this one here. It's down below here. Sol keys. These are all the keys that we can map through, because this is in an object and these are objects. I want to map through all of these days. So they provided you with these sol keys. So we can map through this and get the properties, because these values in this array are properties on this object. So I map through these sol keys dot map, and we have a sol key, and then we have an inline arrow function. And I'm going to return a new object that I'm going to place in our weather state up here. So I return curly braces, I return a new object. I have a key that I call sol, and this one is going to be the sol key that we get here, comma. I create a property that I call max temp. And from this data here in the weather, I'm going to grab that sol key that we're actually on. So weather, square brackets, and sol key. This will grab that property with all that data, .at.mx, and this will get the max temperature for us. But as I told you in the beginning of this tutorial, there are some cases where they won't return this data. So when it tries to grab this data, and if it doesn't exist, it will throw an error and the app will stop working. But this is a perfect use case to show the new ES 2020 optional chaining, because if we put a question mark here, it will return undefined instead for us. So that's really nice, because if we're not using this question mark and we try to access a property that don't exist, it will break. JavaScript will break, but not with the ES 2020 optional chaining. So put a question mark just after this property that's called @ here. And if it's undefined, we can just return no data like that. And then we can copy this row. Make sure that you create a comma here, because this is an object. We can rename this to min temp, and we change this to mn instead, and that will grab the min temp for us, the minimum temperature. And then we have the wind speed. I'm going to round this off, so math round. We have the weather, square brackets, and the sol key again. And to get the wind speed, we have a property that's called HWS. And just as before, I created a question mark. And we have another property that's AV. I think it's for average. And we have double pipes and a 0. So if this one is undefined, we're just going to return 0. And make sure to create a comma there. And then I create a property that's called wind direction degrees, like that. And from weather, square brackets, sol key, dot, WD, wind direction, and a question mark, really important, and a dot, most underscore common. And we have to have another question mark here, because now we're accessing another property a level down, dot compass underscore degrees. Be really careful with the spelling here, so you get that correctly. And if we don't have that value, we have double pipes, we just return a 0 instead. So this is the power of optional chaining in ES 2020. And we're going to have our last property, and that's the date. So we import this function up here that's called format date. So we can use that one now to format the date. new, we create a new date. This is built-in stuff in JavaScript. And we have the weather, square brackets, sol key. And we have a property that's called, I think it should be capital F, all right? First underscore UTC. Be careful with the spelling again. Do some auto formatting. That's the new object that we create, and we have to put this one in the state now. So just below here, below the map function, first we set the weather with the Mars weather. That's the one, the const that we create to hold all this data, Mars weather. And then we can also set the selected sol to the Mars weather dot length -1. I want to set it to the last one in the array to get the latest weather. And then we set loading to false because we're not loading anymore. And I'm not doing any error handling here. And you probably should do that, but for this tutorial, I left it out so it won't get too long and complex. So we grab all the data here from the API and we create this new object here that we place in our set weather state. So that will hopefully get all the data that we need for this application. And then I select the last sol in the array because I want to show the latest weather, and that's the last element in the array. And I set the loading to false to indicate that we have grabbed all the data and we're not loading more. So this is our use effect here. And we can try this out again. If we console.log weather, like that, and save the file and go back to the browser to see what we got. We have a lot of console logs here now, and that's because we're setting all these states. And some people may say, oh, that's a lot of re-renders of this component, but it's not that bad actually. It won't re-render everything, and it will cause no issue with performance or anything like that. So first we have the empty array here. We don't have any data, and then we have the data here in our state. So that's great. And you can see that it also shows us all these nice little components here now. We just need to specify the data for all the components now. So that's what we're going to do. So go back to our code down below here in the JSX. So the first thing we have to do is to provide our components with all the data here. And we have this component that's called weather data. That's the one that holds all of this here. Header, that's going to be the sol, and we have the temperature and the wind. So that's the weather data component. So we can give this one our state. We call it sol. And we have the weather, and we have our state that's called selected sol. So we're grabbing the selected sol from our state and give it all that data so we can use it inside of the component. Selected sol. Have I done a typo here? Yeah, it should say selected sol like that. All right. Give it some space here also. So we give it the sol that we're currently on, and we do that by using the selected sol on our weather to grab that property. All right. Then we're going to give it is metric and the metric value. So that's the one that we're giving the weather data. And we can actually go inside of that component now. So we have the components folder and we have the weatherdata.js. And let's go through this from the top and work our way down. So I'm importing from the helpers the format temperature. We're going to use this to, as it say, format the temperature. And I have these styles here, the wrapper date, temp, and wind. So the wrapper, it's the wrapper for the component. And then I have the date here. So let's start with that. We have an H2 header and the text. So we are sending in all the data for this sol to this prop that's called sol here. So we can actually just create curly braces, and from sol, we grab the property sol, and that will get the sol name, the sol number. And we're going to show the date here. So sol.date. Then Let's move on. We have the temperature. First, we have the high temperature, and we have a span here. And inside of this, I'm going to use the format temperature. That's the function that we imported. And I'm going to give it the sol.mintemp from our state, and also the isMetric, because we are going to format this differently depending on if it's metric or not. All right, then we are going to give it an F or a C depending on if it is metric or not. So curly braces. So isMetric, that's the other prop that we give this component. So we can check if it is metric and create a Turner operator. And then I create a C. Please note that I have a space here also because I want a space between the temperature and the actual letter here. Then we have colon, space, and F. This will hopefully display the max temperature and the correct metric for us. So we can copy this one, and we have the lowest temperature here, paste it in where it says temp. Yeah, and this one should of course say max temp instead, because that's the max temperature. And we have the min temp here then, okay. And then we can copy this one here also. It's the same in this span for the low temperature. All right, so that's the temp. We only have the wind left. And here I'm setting this one degrees to 180, but we have the wind direction in degrees in our state. So from sol.wind direction degrees is going to give it the correct degrees and also turn the needle to the correct degrees that we need to turn it to. All right, then we have the speed, and we also have that in our state. So sol.wind speed, like that. And we can also check if it's metric here. Is metric, question mark, space, kph, colon, whoops, space, and mph. And this will give us the correct metric, hopefully. So this is everything we have to do in this component. I can just briefly show you here in this wind style. If we go inside of the weatherdata.styles, I have this component that's called wind here, and you can see that I'm using on this one here, wind _error, I'm using that prop degree here to set the direction. So this is what makes the needle spin, and then we have some nice transitions here that will make it look nice when it spins. So that's the weather data. Okay, so let's save this file and go back to our browser, save it, and reload it just in case. You can see that we have the data here now. We have the sol, and we have the date, we have the temperature, we have the wind speed. So that's great. And this one isn't working yet because we are going to fix those things now. So back inside of the app.js file, let's move down to our JSX and continue on. So we created the weather data, then we have the info wrapper, the info, we don't need to send in something to that one, but the unit is going to need the metric, so we create a prop and send in the metric. We call the prop metric also, and then we want to be able to also set the metric from that component, so we give it the set metric, like this, save the file and go inside of the component, the unit.js, and I've already created these props here, the metric and set metric. So we have the label, and then we have the toggle, and the toggle is the one that I'm going to use here. That's the button that we actually click. So we give it the metric, and these ones are props that I send in to the style component. And I have an on-click handler. I'm going to create an inline function because I'm also going to give this set metric some arguments. So that's why we need to have an inline function, otherwise it will fire off instantly, and that's no good. Set metric, we have the previous value and an inline arrow function, and we have an exclamation mark and previous, and this will invert the value. So if it's true, it will be false, and if it's false, it will be true. And this should be it. This should be everything that we have to do on this component. Do some auto formatting. It put these parentheses here. I don't really like that. I want to have it like this when it's only one argument. But okay, It's the default settings in Create React App. So save it, go back to our browser and see if it works. And it does, and that's awesome. That's sweet. I really love when stuff works. So we just have to create these previous days now. And we have to do that with a map. We have to map through something here. So in the app.js file, we first have to give our previous some props, and then we're going to map through stuff in the previous component to create all of the 7 days that we can jump between. Okay, so I put these ones on their own row. We're going to have 4 props. We're going to give it the weather. That's the complete state. We're going to give it the previous to know if it should be open or closed, and also set previous, because we also want to be able to change this from this component. Set previous, so that's the state and the state setter that we're sending through with props. And then set selected sol, because when we click on a new day, we want to change the selected sol. So that's why we're sending down this setter also. Set selected sol, like that. Do some auto formatting and save it. And this should be it for the app.js file. Just make sure to see that nothing breaks. And you can see nothing works now. And we're going to fix that now. So back inside of our code. And we are going to open up the previous.js file in the components. So this is what I've created for you. And we have to fill this out with some stuff here. So down below here, the previous wrapper, I'm just setting this to default false. But now we have the real value here, so we give it the previous prop instead. So this can be true or false, it's a Boolean. And then we have the toggle. That's the button for open and closing it. We can set an on-click handler on this one. And just as before, we have an inline arrow function and set previous. We're going to have the previous state, an inline arrow function again, and an exclamation mark and previous, and this will invert the value. So this is how we jump between true and false when we open and close it. And then we give it the previous value like this. So these ones are prop. This one is preview, something like that, I think. This is a prop for the style components to change style depending on if this is true or false. So that's how we open and close it. You can see in the styles here, previous wrapper, you can see that I'm using this prop here to transform this one in and out of the screen. So that's how you can do it with style components and props to change this value to make it show and not show. All right, back to the previous component. And of course, the on-click handler will set the value if it should be open or closed. So we can save it, go back to our application, see if it works, and it does. So that's sweet. And you can also see that the arrow changes here depending on the value, if it should be open or not. So that's great. All right, just some small things left to do. So this one, we can leave the rest as it is here and move down to the previous days. It just says previous days now, but we have to create our map method inside of here to map through our state and create a previous day for each element in the state. Okay, so from our weather, we can map through everything. So we have the sol and the index. We have an inline arrow function. And in this case, we can create parentheses because we are going to do an implicit return. We don't have the return statement as we just returned JSX. And we're going to wrap everything in our previous day. That's the component that I already created for us and importing it up here. We're going to give it a key. You always have to have a key in React when you map through things, and it has to be unique. So we give it a sol.sol. The sol value is always unique. And we also want to give it the previous value for styling, like that. And inside of here, we can create all the stuff that we need. And it's going to be, quite a lot of JSX inside of here. But it's okay for this one. So we have an h3 tag with a class name of previous dash day double underscore sol. And these are the class names that I already defined in the app. I haven't changed this one. So make sure that you get this correctly, otherwise it won't work. These classes are already created for us in the style components. So I haven't created a special style component for every little JSX element here. I'm just using the classes because you can do that with style components also. You can have a class name inside of it and nest it. If we look here, you can see that these classes are nested inside of the style component. So it's completely legit to use regular class names also. You don't have to create an own style component for every little component in every use case. Okay. Then we have a span, and I'm going to give it the sol.sol for this one. That's the header. That's going to be the sol number. And below the h3 tag, we have a p tag with a class name of previous dash day double underscore date. All right. And we give it the sol.date. We have another p tag with a class name of previous dash day double underscore temp, like so. And we can type in hi and colon. We create a span, and we give it the sol.max temp. I hope this makes sense to you now, how you can see that we use the values here. And we have another span, and I actually forgot to give this prop to this one. So back inside of the app.js file, we're also going to give it the metric. I think it's called, metric. So we give it the metric prop also to see if it's set to metric or not. So back inside of the previous.js, so inside of this span here, we check if, to be consistent, we can actually name this to isMetric, like that. I think that's the one that we used up here, So rename the prop to isMetric and save it and go back to the previous. And we have curly braces and we check if isMetric. Then we have a question mark. We create a turning operator. And inside of the quotes, we have a space. And if it is metric, it should say Celsius, I think it is. Yeah. Otherwise, it says F, like that. And we end it with a curly brace. So isMetric, we also have to structure out that prop up here. isMetric. Do some auto formatting, and it will put them on their own row. Okay, so that's the metric, and that's the high value. We also have to create our low value, so we can copy this one, the complete p tag, paste it in below the other one, and this is the previous day temp. It's the same class name. We can rename this to low, and we change this to min temp instead, and this one is going to be the same. All right. Then we just have to create the button also, so we can change day. So we create a button with a class name of previous dash day double underscore more dash info. I can say it again. Be very careful with the spelling here, otherwise it won't work, because the class names are named exactly like this. And I have an on-click handler with an inline arrow function, set selected sol. And in this case, I want to set it to the I value, because this will grab the correct element in the array, because the I value will represent what sol we're on in the array. So that's why we can use the I value. So if we map through this and we're at the index 2 in the array, that's the third element. So we can set that to 2 and we can grab that element. So that's how we know what element we're going to grab. Then we close the button And we can have some text that says more info and do some auto formatting, and it will make it look nice. And I think this should be it. So I save this file and hope that we don't have an error. Go back to the browser, reload it just to be sure to see that everything works. The responsive styles, yeah. And let's see, we have the previous days. You can see here also that this is not optimal. It shows this scroll bar here when it animates them in. And I think that's something that you can try out yourself to fix all this responsive styling to get it a little bit more nice. And let's see if it works. If we change, yeah, it works. Superb. And that makes me happy. And this is it. We've successfully recreated this application using React instead. So I hope this gave you some value. And if you like this channel and the stuff I do, please make sure to subscribe. I will put up videos like this regularly. So, as always, see you in another one.